Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of our Thrive in China Roundtable. Before we start today's session, again, just to get a little bit of background regarding the audience. So those of you that are watching live, those of you that are watching this on replay, if you could let me know a little bit about your backgrounds. I know that Joe is reaching out also to a lot of you who we've never met before to understand what your backgrounds are as well. But if you would be so kind to let us know whether you're a newbie to China, startup in China, or an experienced China hand, that always gives us a lot of insight. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have over 18 years of experience helping foreign investors with their market entry into China. As part of Woodburn's service, though, we're headquartered in Hong Kong, and we have a subsidiary in Shanghai. Our focus is predominantly on foreign investors coming into those two jurisdictions, and we help with a variety of services all the way from pre-investment advisory to the actual implementation of structures, the ongoing outsourcing solutions associated with corporate administration, and then helping people and advising people on growth and scaling up in China. Over the last 18 odd years, we have seen a lot of changes in the administrative processes around operating entities in China. And this is why we have created 7 to 8 different webinars, recordings, allowing people to have an understanding of the actual administrative processes associated with incorporating and maintaining and operating structures in China. If you're interested in receiving the links to these presentations, email us and we'd be happy to give you access to it. And last but not least, if you haven't received a free copy of our ebook, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Companies Make in China, then email me, Christina@woodburnglobal.com, and I'd be happy to give you a free version. So we've hit roundtable 18 in 2023, and the topic for today is around the legal and tax consequences of selecting your location in China. Now, the reason why I'm so specific on offering this roundtable is because of the amount of clients that I have that rush into this selection, do not think properly about it, and then have to spend a fortune from a corporate administration perspective of fixing it later on. The goal for me today is to really have people understand what the legal and tax consequences are of having your entity in a specific location in China, what it means if you want to move within a city, what it means if you want to move between cities, okay? And I hope this will then clarify to you how it can affect your business, how it might potentially halt your business if you are not sure on the location of where you want to be in China, all right? So I want to start off by saying I'm not a real estate agent, okay? If you want to know what, from a commercial perspective, the real estate environment looks like, I want people to be aware that one of the primary services that real estate agents offer is location studies. And by location studies, I mean they're going to look at these 10 key points in terms of choosing a location that fits your company and fits what you're trying to achieve in market. Okay, I don't offer these studies. I'm pushing you to go find real estate agents to talk to them so you analyze this accordingly. The first is obviously looking at the style of your operation, right? Are you fine with being in a co-working environment? Do you want to be in a proper business center? Do you want to have your own traditional office? Do you need a commercial space, a retail space, a warehousing facility? Are you interested in understanding the demographics of the areas that you're choosing, i.e., can you find skilled workers? Can you find headhunters, recruiters? Do you have this access to the network and the ecosystem and the people you need to build your business? Think about foot traffic, and obviously this is more important. This is more important if you're really more in the commercial area. In 2000, I forget, it was 2007, 2008, we moved offices, and I hadn't thought about foot traffic. There wasn't even a nearby MTR at that point. There were barely any restaurants. There was a Kwai Di, which is a convenience store, and that was about it. And it was really, really hard for me to grow and add headcount, just because the area was inaccessible. Eventually, the area did become accessible. There was parking available and restaurants started developing. And then we had, I think, 3 different metro lines. But it did take a couple of years before we even got there. The next is competition, kind of analyzing, where are your competitors? Have they been strategic about their locations? Why have they been strategic about their locations? Proximity to other businesses and services. For me, one of the biggest priorities is proximity to banks. How close are the various, or how many bank branches are available in our area? What different types of banks are there? We also look at where the government offices are. We also look at the proximity to our clients, where are the majority based. So analyzing that is also really important. The image and history of the site. I say this because I've got an example to show you, but is image important? For us as a service provider, we do have to be in a type of grade A building. Do you have to be in such a building? Or is it okay for you to be in a grade C building? Does it matter where, let's say in Shanghai, you're located? It's also important to look at the regulations. Regulations I would like everybody to take with a pinch of salt. Be aware that regulations change. They change frequently, and I will be touching that on later in the presentation under the tax regulations. Look at the building's infrastructure. The last thing that you want to do is have to relocate if things start falling apart, and obviously look at the general utilities and costs. Now, again, I want to reiterate, generally, the real estate agents will have a questionnaire for you to fill in about what you are looking for in terms of a property. And this will be their starting point in terms of doing their location study and analyzing what would be the right location for you. Okay. Obviously, in all of this, looking at where your customers are, where your suppliers are, where your third-party providers are, etc. Now, like I said, I don't do location analyses or location studies, but I do want to highlight how important it is for people to think about taking this. Especially if you are in warehousing, manufacturing, what is the right location for you? Even in the commercial sector, what is the right location for your business? All right. And again, you've got to speak to your real estate agents regarding this. Now, I wanted to provide you, it's a bit of a blurry picture, I apologize, but I wanted to provide you an idea. This is an old, I believe it was the old Opera of Shanghai, which has now been converted to the flagship store of Starbucks. It is magnificent. It is beautiful. It is always, always packed. And it is on, if you know Shanghai, it's on Nanjing Road West, really in the downtown area, easily accessible. There is a metro stop behind, or a metro exit, sorry, behind this building, and one directly in front of it. There is constant foot traffic, especially on Nanjing Road West, and they made this investment to completely renovate the location, and it has just brought up the image of Starbucks. And not only do they do coffees and teas and whatnot, but they've expanded into a whole array of other things as well. So again, for your business, think very strategically about whether you need flagship stores, whether you need to be in a commercially sound building. Is image of importance. Now, in today's session, we're going to be looking at the legal and tax consequences of your registered office address. What I haven't touched on, because this is part of the incorporation blueprint, is the fact that you do need to have a registered office address when you incorporate your entity in China. The question is, what is a registered office address? What does it mean? And I guess I will be touching on the loopholes around it as well. Okay, so we're going to start off with the legal consequences. Now, when you register your company in China, a registered office address is a must for any type of company registration, and it must be your operational office as well. You will have problems if you choose a random space and then actually put your operational office in another location. If you get a random site inspection by any government officer, you will run into difficulties. Also, keep in mind that when you're opening your bank account in China, the bank is now required by the People's Bank of China to do site visits at the registered office address. Okay, so in terms of registered office addresses, questions arise like, what is the definition? What do we have to have? This morning, I woke up to my first email from an American client saying, in the US, we can have mailboxes, like PO boxes as registered office address. Does this not exist in China? No, it does not exist in China, okay? In China, virtual office addresses are actually considered to be illegal, okay? So a registered office address in the eyes of the government is actually a room with 4 walls. So even if you go to a business center, you should be having a room with 4 walls as your registered office address. Nowadays, there are law firms who have applied for a special license where they can register their clients for their first year of operation within the law firm's registered office address location. But it's tied to a specific amount of time. Now, we had one client who did this. They used a law firm for an incorporation. They used the law firm's registered office address as their address. They forgot about it, which happens. And about 1.5 to 2 years into operating as the outsourced provider for accounting, tax, bank, payroll, and whatnot, suddenly their bank, which was China Merchants Bank, reached out to us to say, they have frozen the bank account because the registered office address is not considered to be legal. And until they have changed their registered office address, the bank will remain to be frozen. That just meant they could have oversight of the bank account. They could see things, you know, they could go into the online banking platform. They could receive funds. That was not an issue, but they could no way pay for anything, which meant they couldn't pay for salaries. They couldn't pay for third-party providers, costs, nothing, okay? Now, this doesn't happen too often, but it has happened. We've seen it personally, I've seen it. And it took 2.5 months for us to do the bureaucratic process of changing and updating the registered office address, which meant that for 2.5 months, they had no access to their bank account, okay? Now, in addition to all of that, like I said, when you open up your bank account in China, the bank will be visiting your site, your registered office address site. But in addition to that, throughout your China journey, you might get random government inspections from a variety of different bureaus, but primarily from the tax bureau. So in Shenzhen, we also had this situation. We had, our client had a traditional office space. In this scenario, our client did not have a receptionist. Basically, they had engineers who predominantly worked on site. If you looked through the door of the office, you could see that there were desks, workstations with computers and all of that. But at the time of the visit, there was nobody in the office. Everybody was on site. And because nobody was there and readily available to talk to the tax inspector, following his own guidelines, had to padlock the office. So they put a lock and chain around the doors and with a notice on the window of the door. So until they called the tax inspector and said, why did you do this? They're following regulation. He said, well, nobody was there. And as a consequence, we had to padlock. We weren't sure if you were a real company or not, or if it was all fake. And so now we can arrange an appointment where I will come and inspect your offices. And usually when there's an inspection, they just want to see, are you real? Are you alive? Do your management reports reflect the office, i.e., does your payroll match the headcount that you have indicated, or do you have more people? and therefore you're not declaring salaries. They want to look at your business license. They also want to see if generally all your compliance and administration is up to date. Okay, so having a virtual office concept is illegal. However, I have to make this disclaimer because it exists. You will find that business centers have found loopholes around this. Okay, so business centers, the loophole they have found is that they will offer a service which is called a registered office address only solution, where they will charge you an annual fee and use one of the other rooms that they have, but that is rented by somebody else, but is not registered with the real estate bureau associated with a company. And you will use that space for your registered office address. You don't actually get a room. You don't pay for a room or anything like that. But in your incorporation documents, it looks like you have a room. Okay? If you don't understand what I'm meaning or that was complicated, let me know in the chat box. But basically, these business centers have found a solution. In Shanghai, and I'll touch this on as a case study later on, you have the Australia House, where you can rent a workstation for minimum peanuts amounts. I say peanuts amounts for Shanghai, right? It's not peanuts amounts like a PO box in the US. And basically they use one of their office spaces within the entire building to then register that entity in that space. But you basically are just renting a workstation and that's it, right? There are also districts that are trying to promote foreign investors to come into their district, into their zone, where they will offer also virtual office addresses. Now, these locations are government run. So it's the government who is offering you the virtual office location. In that scenario, I'm okay with that structure. You still have to sign a lease agreement and it's signed by the government of that district. Okay, so you're signing into a lease agreement with the government. Usually they can even offer you 2 years of rent-free space. They're still going to use a registered office address room in their zone, but because they're brand new, they usually have so much space available. And these lease agreements are for at least 2 years. So you pay no rent. But because it's government run and all of that, if you use your law firm as the registered office address, please discuss with your law firm how long you can have their space, how long you can use their address, so that you put it in your calendar to remind you when you have to make the move, not that you have then frozen bank accounts. Now, in addition to that, we have clients who don't want to commit to longer term lease agreements. In terms of the incorporation, you need to sign a minimum of a 1-year lease agreement. Any agreement at the time that you submit the documents that is shorter than that will be denied during the registration process. So one thing that we have seen a lot of is our clients greenlight the China project. They say, yes, we're ready to go. They sign a lease agreement, but then they don't actually submit the documents to the government because it takes so long to make decisions, for another 3 to 6 months. And then you're already 6 months into your 1-year lease agreement. At this point, you have to re-sign. The government will only accept at the point of submission a 1-year, a 12-month lease agreement. Okay, so the minute you sign your lease agreement, push forward and get that incorporation set up straight away. Now, of course, you can sign longer term lease agreements. This is not an issue whatsoever. I would only do, if you're getting rent-free, sign for at least 2 years. That way, from your budgeting perspective, you're secure. If you're going with a law firm, check with them how long that lease agreement needs to be, but you do need to have a lease agreement in place. In addition to that, when you are incorporating your company in China, you need to make sure that the type of property you're signing that lease agreement with matches the business scope that you are indicating for your company incorporation. So to give you an example, if you are a service company and actually your service is that you're setting up a restaurant, you've got to make sure that the space that you are signing the lease agreement in is dedicated as a restaurant. okay? If you are a production company and you are actually going to be doing warehousing, assembly, or actual production, the lease agreement and the real estate documents from your landlord have to show that the designation of that building or that space is for factory and warehouse. If you're choosing retail and you're going to have a retail space, that space has to be designated for retail. Okay. If you're doing commercial, trade, other services, things like that, then you can be in an actual commercial space. But again, the real estate documents have to show commercial. You will see here, I have not written residential. You cannot register a company in a residential space, especially if that real estate certificate, so your landlord has purchased the property. If in the real estate certificate, it states that this location is residential, you cannot set up your entity in a residential space. Okay, will not be permissible. Now, in Hong Kong, and I believe in a variety of other countries, you can register as many companies as you like in a single office space. In China, only one company can be registered in one registered office space. Okay. Like I said, even the loopholes that the business centers have found, you are still utilizing one of their office spaces as your registered office address, even though you're not paying for the space and you're just paying for the registered office address only solution so that you pay less rent, right? But your entity is still registered in one of those rooms with 4 walls, okay? The same with these districts that are offering rental-free periods. Your registered office address is actually a space, a room with 4 walls within their zone, all right? Only one company can be registered. Now, this is really, really important. And in theory, it's the job of your real estate agent to be doing this homework, is that when you choose a location, you really need to make sure that the previous tenant has been removed from the real estate bureau's allocation for that office space. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through a bureaucratic procedure to get that old tenant out of the system so that you can put your new company into it. And this can halt the incorporation stage of your entity, okay? So only one company can be registered, and action here is reach out to the landlord directly or reach out to the real estate agent, making sure that your name can immediately be put in with the real estate bureau. Okay. Now, the biggest dilemma comes if you suddenly realize that the city that you have chosen in China is not good for your business, and actually you now want to change cities. I spoke about this last week with actually a German company, and I didn't know this, but in Germany, you can actually move your company anywhere throughout the country. I wasn't aware of that. So if you decide in Munich one day that actually you should be in Frankfurt, you just change it automatically. In China, this is not possible. When you register your company, you are registering in that city and within that government office of that city. So if you decide I want to be in Shanghai and you register your company in Shanghai, and then overnight you say, actually, whoops, Beijing is better, you cannot just pick up your company and move it to Beijing. They are considered 2 separate jurisdictions in China. This means you have options, 2 of them. One, you say, all right, I made a bad decision. I will now incorporate my entity in Beijing and liquidate the entity in Shanghai. It means you have to go through a liquidation process. Alternatively, you can say, all right, I'll keep the company in Shanghai and set up a branch office of that company in Beijing. Okay. The downside to that option, though, is that you still have to have a registered office address in Shanghai. You still have to maintain the entity, which means you still have to do, you still have to report your financial management reports for the tax bureau. You have to do an audit, etc. Okay. You can't just pick up that structure and move it around. So you really have to know about what city do you want to be in. Stefan, I am going to touch on that on the tax consequences, because that's actually a tax consequence, not a legal consequence. From a legal perspective, within a city, you can move from district to district, not a problem. But there is a tax consequence if you do move districts. From a legal side, not an issue. So Stefan is asking basically, if you register in Jing'an district of Shanghai, can you move to Channing district of Shanghai? Yes, you can. Not a problem. Okay? Just wait until the tax consequences though. That's where dilemmas arise. So you've got to make sure you know where you want to be. Now, if your goal is to set up branch offices throughout China, the key is knowing where do you want your China head office to be, and then to open those branches up. Okay? That's not an issue at all. All right, now we're going to touch on the tax consequences. If I do this too fast, message in the chat and tell me to slow down, okay? And I've got examples to show you, so hopefully with the images, it'll be clear in your mind. Okay, when you register your company, the first thing is you're choosing a city. Okay, I'm going to use, in this example, Shanghai, because all the diagrams are associated with Shanghai. So if you decide Shanghai, you are then going to choose a district within Shanghai. Okay, in that district, you're then going to choose an office space that will become your registered office address. Okay, now from a tax perspective, what I want you to realize is that you are registering your company in Shanghai, but you are registering your tax status in the district of that office space that you have chosen. Okay, so I've shown here a diagram of Shanghai. Okay, you have, I think, 12 to 15 different districts that you can establish your entity in. Okay, the yellow, so points 1 to 8, are for me really the central business districts. Okay, if you look at Baoshan, Jiading, Qingpu, Songjiang, Fengshan, Minhang, Pudong, I call that the suburbs of Shanghai. It is still the municipality of Shanghai, so you're registering your company in Shanghai, but those are really the suburbs of Shanghai. Okay, now you have to realize that each of those borders, each of these districts has its own tax office. Okay, you also have to realize that these tax offices, these district tax bureaus, have certain tax KPIs that they need to achieve, right? And they're all in competition one with the other in terms of who achieves the highest tax revenue. Okay, now I'll be honest with you, there are some tax bureaus that are very lenient and are not so strict and rigid with the tax laws. There are others that are extremely conservative and rigid and follow the tax laws to the T. You have some districts that are not at all filled with foreign investors, which actually means that they're not familiar with the foreign investment laws, right? Which means that if you are trying to get certain preferential treatments because you're a foreign investor, they might have no clue as to how to go about doing this, all right? And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look at that little area, number 4, that's Jing'an district. Jing'an district each year earns the highest tax revenue out of all of Shanghai, that little area. Why? Because most companies, especially commercially and service-oriented companies, are going to register in that Jing'an area, okay? It has the highest majority of folks that are in there. Because they are annually always earning the highest tax revenues, they tend to be relatively strict in terms of following tax law procedures, and they're not quite lenient when you want to obtain certain loopholes or have a bit of ease around working around certain stuff. We are based in, oh, that must be number 1 because it's not listed here. We are in Huangpu district, number 1. There we have found actually that the flexibility of the tax officers is greatly appreciated, much more lenient, and quite nice to work with. Fengshan district, where we have 1 client at the moment, clueless, absolutely clueless. Clueless about how foreign investors work in China because they don't have so many foreign investors that are actually registered there, okay? In addition to that, their IT system is rubbish. So actually you have to travel all the time to there. Now, our clients in Fengshan, they only have their registered office address in Fengshan. Their operational office is actually in Huangpu. So we've been trying to push and persuade them to change their registered office address. But they know it's going to halt their business. And I'll touch on that a bit later on. It's going to halt their business for a certain period of time, which they can't afford to do at the moment. Okay. Pudong, not my favorite of districts in terms of tax bureaus. Plenty of foreign investors located there. But again, very conservative mentality, more so even than Jing'an Tax Bureau, and sometimes quite difficult to work with. So again, I want you to understand that each of these districts has its own tax bureau that does, you know, administratively does things differently than other districts. Now, I want you to have this background information because I think it does, I want you to know that, you know, you're having a long-term relationship with your tax bureau, you're having a long-term relationship with your tax officers. It's important to know how they work and how they function. Because what you do want is a tax officer who is familiar with foreign invested companies, knows how the system works, has an open dialogue of communication, and doesn't treat you like a mainland Chinese company, okay? So the next point that I want to touch on is tax incentives that may be offered by state, local, or district governments. Now, what I want you to take away from this slide is tax incentives are not permanent incentives. They are used for a certain period of time to attract foreign investors into their area, but they are by no means permanent. Now, many of you might know of in Shenzhen, there is the Qianhai investment zone, where they're trying to attract a lot of different industries, a lot of different sectors. And basically the Qianhai investment zone has said, for anybody who registers here, you get a 15% profits tax rate. All well and good. The issue now is they're ending it. So by December 31st, so January 1st, 2026, the whole zone will be now on a 25% profits tax rate. So if you chose that location only because of this special preferential treatment, it's gone. Okay, in 2 years it'll be gone. So keep in mind that these incentives are not permanent. Make sure you're doing your research right now to understand whether these incentives are expiring. It looks like a lot of the zones in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, as well as some of the tier 2 cities are expiring within the next 2 to 5 years. Make sure you do your tax planning once these are expiring, okay? What I have seen, again, it's not a permanent incentive, but what I am liking more because it gives you a more immediate effect. You know, you can go to a zone because the profits tax rate is 15%. The question is, when are you going to be profitable? At what stage in your China journey are you actually going to be profitable to take advantage of that 15% profits tax rate? Some zones and some districts are offering nowadays tax subsidies, and not just for profits tax. They are offering it for profits tax, VAT, individual income tax, potentially even stamp duty, maybe even consumption tax. Okay. For me, these subsidies are an immediate effect because VAT will hit you from day one. Individual income tax, if you're planning on hiring, will impact you from day one and is a fantastic benefit for your employees as well as for you. Stamp duty will hit you from day one, right? Consumption tax, if you are in that sector, will also hit you from day one. Why not take advantage of those subsidies from day one? You probably will not be profitable from day one. So if you're looking at tax incentives, I would recommend looking nowadays at the subsidies that are being offered that will incur an immediate effect to you versus waiting for the profits tax to actually be implemented, because it takes you 5 years to become profitable. Okay. To give you a couple of examples, I think it's on the next slide. I want to give you this example. So the Australia House, this is in Channing District. The Australia House is a project that was developed by the Ankin Group. They are also the management of this building, and they have a very close relationship with the Channing District government and with the Channing Tax Bureau. Obviously, the Australian government has also subsidized this real estate project, and the Australian Chamber of Commerce has actually the top floor. But in reality, this entire building is a serviced office. Okay, it is, I believe, 6 or 7 floors, with the 7th floor being for the Australian Chamber of Commerce. So it has 6 floors of office space, hot desking, co-working, etc. Okay, just for this building, and only for this building, the Channing Tax Bureau has offered preferential policies in the form of tax rebates or tax refunds in profits tax, VAT, and individual income tax, just for the companies that are registered in that building. Okay. Now, this building has been open for quite a number of years. I've been promoting this now since, I believe, 2020. So these tax eligibilities are still benefiting. And obviously, you have to be in a certain sector and a certain industry to be able to benefit from it. Okay. But I do want people to understand that there are these options available. Right now, we are working also with a zone, or a zone which is not a huge zone, but it's a small area in Putois district that has been redeveloped for commercial businesses. And in this Putois district zone, it's an international, they're calling it the international, it's an international hub. So their main objective is to attract foreign investors. They're offering companies 2-year rent-free. So they're fantastic. It's a virtual office concept. It's 2 years rent-free. Plus, the Putois Tax Bureau is offering rebates on VAT, on profits tax, as well as on individual income tax. And in case you guys are asking how these rebates work, now, if you're looking at the 2023 fiscal year, you pay your taxes as normal based on the current rates that are existing. When you do your annual compliance work for 2023, based on your final audited numbers in terms of profits tax, VAT, individual income tax, the government will then give you a refund, not a credit. They will actually refund your bank account if you're eligible. Okay, so that's how it works from a practical standpoint. Okay. Now, based on Stefan's question earlier, if you want to change office space and move to a new district, which can totally happen, okay, you've got to understand the tax consequences. So for this point, I'm going to go back to the Shanghai map as an example. Okay, so I'm going to use the bigger names that you see so you can visualize it a little bit better. So let's say we have set up our company in Baoshan district, right up there in the north. All well and good. But suddenly we realize we need more space. We're increasing headcount. Perhaps we're even expanding our business scope, that we need a warehousing facility. And currently in Baoshan, there is nothing that's available, or there is something available, but it's completely outside of our budget range. So you're hopping around looking where actually can you now move to. So you're going to say, we found the most perfect location in Jiading district, right next door. Okay. So you want to move from Baoshan to Jiading. The process is that you have to do a tax closure audit with your tax bureau in Baoshan to make sure you have no outstanding tax liabilities, to then reopen with the Jiading tax bureau. Now, why do I say that this can halt your business? This can halt your business because whenever you do a liquidation or closure audit, you have to choose your final date of operation with that bureau. Then that bureau is going to do an audit to check you have no outstanding tax liabilities in all tax categories: profits tax, VAT, individual income tax, stamp duty, whatever else might exist for you specifically. Okay. Obviously, if there is a liability, you have to pay for that liability. But that audit does not happen overnight. It might not even happen within a week. Potentially, it might take 8 to 10 weeks for that audit to happen, especially if you decide to do that relocation in the peak season of all audits and annual compliance procedures. So if you were deciding to relocate between March and June now, everything would have been postponed. Not the ideal time of year to do a relocation. Okay. Now, what does this mean from a practical standpoint? If you are selling in China and you are still working with paper fapiaos, you will not be able to purchase any more booklets, which means you have to wait until you are registered in the Jiading Tax Bureau to make sure you then have the ability to apply for paper fapiaos and start issuing paper fapiaos. Okay. In addition to that, because for a certain period of time you've been developing a relationship with your Baoshan tax officer, you have to start a fresh new relationship with your Jiading tax officer, who might not know your background, might not know the history of the company, might not know the types of transactions, and they might not give you the, I want to say, preferential treatments that your Baoshan tax officer might have given to you over the period of time that you've been located there. Let me give you a specific example. The Jiading Tax Bureau officer might not give you, let's say at Baoshan, you were able to apply for 100 sheets of fapiaos. Jiading might say, no, you have to start from scratch. I'm only going to give you 25. Now, I know we're all going into this e-fapiao world, but I'm just highlighting to you, there's still going to be a quota on the e-fapiaos. Okay, so they might even be stricter with you with the quotas. So it is starting a brand new relationship, and you have to weigh out the pros and cons to understand whether you're willing to take that risk when relocating your office. Okay, which is why, again, I want to highlight, you should not be rushing into a decision. If you can, if you say, I choose Baoshan, you need to know from a real estate agent, what is the future of Baoshan looking like? What availability is there for expansion so that you remain in that district? Okay. So, I mean, we're really going into the nitty-gritty details here, guys, but this is why I'm so focused on having people understand how vital it is for you to know the risks of your registered office address. People don't take it seriously. I don't know how else to emphasize it except through this roundtable. But when I do get a lot of new clients, they're like, Christina, we just need to be set up by tomorrow. Just tell me what's the easiest place. They don't think about the long-term longevity and the relationships you're building up. Everything in China is about relationships, and the relationship with your tax officer is crucial. Okay? So I do want people to realize that. Understand the tax consequences if you're going to be moving districts. Now, to finish off today's presentation, I do have a bit of an action plan for everybody, okay? Which none of you will like because it'll take time and research to do, but I want people to analyze this. This is what you've got to analyze actually in this pre-investment stage before you incorporate in China. If you are already incorporated in China, This is your action plan or your checklist, if you will, to know whether really you want to change districts. Okay. Now, as we all know, location is fundamental, right? Real estate agents, their mantra is location, location, location. All right. Have you found the right location for your business? As I said, investigate what real estate agents can offer you in terms of location studies. I've seen some. They actually create these research projects, like books, where they have analyzed probably 10 to 12 different locations in China, and as analyzing it from, I don't know, between 15 to 20, how do you say, checklist points, to really find what would be the best suggestion for you. Okay, thinking not just short term, but also long term. The next is obviously looking at your rental budget, right? Your finance managers are all going to tell you, hey guys, we're not going to throw a number out there and say you can be in any place for an exorbitant amount of money. No, 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 no. You have to have a budget. You have to understand what the market rates are. You have to understand that places like Shanghai are going to be much, much more expensive than places like Wuxi, right? Shanghai has a much greater standard of living, and real estate prices in general are higher in Shanghai. Okay. Then if you're looking at tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. Then you got to analyze the type of office space do you need based also on the business scope that you're going to have. Does a business center work? Do you need co-working? Do you need a traditional office space? Do you need a factory space, retail space? What are actually your needs in terms of office space? And how do you plan on growing that space? Okay. Now, my tip is this. If you go with the traditional office route, think bigger. So don't go just into a 50 square meter space. Start off with 100 square meters so that you know, I don't know, if you're in your forecast, you say 100 square meters, you can fit, I don't know, 12 people in there. You know, that 12 people isn't going to happen overnight, right? It's going to happen over a whole period of years. But when you go into that 100 square meter space, you can also negotiate a much longer term contract. You can negotiate. I mean, I remember back in the day with my old company, I had negotiated, I want to say a 7-year contract where I was able to fix the first 5 years in rent. And I knew for those 5 years, my rent was totally fixed. And we had put in the clause that for the following 2 years, it would be based on the inflation rate at that time. Something to that effect. But again, get advice from your real estate agents. Back in those days, that was what my real estate agent was suggesting to me. I wanted to go into a bigger space. I wanted to stay in one space and not have to deal with further renovation costs, buying additional furniture, etc. I just wanted to be fixed in a location for a much longer period of time. And they helped me with the negotiation of that contract. That's also what the real estate agents are there to do for you. You've also got to realize that locations affect operations, they affect sales, they affect talent acquisition, they affect logistics. So you've got to understand how choosing your city, choosing your district, how that might affect you. The whole purpose of today's presentation was on the legal and tax consequences. So as you can see, location can affect the legal and the tax aspects of your business. Okay, don't brush these aside. Don't also rush into making a decision. I have quite a few clients right now that are rushing to set up their structures because they have a deadline in terms of when they want to be operational. And they're really putting this on the side. And I worry because I know that there are going to be mistakes made and then they're going to change their minds later on. It's going to cost you more to fix a decision than if you take your time making that decision. Meet with real estate agents. There are plenty out there. Okay, you've got the big ones. You've got JLL, Cushfield. What is it called? Cushfield, Wakefield. I don't know. I like working with the smaller ones personally. You get more of a tailor-made service. They kind of hold your hand a bit more than working with the big ones. The big ones are really only interested if you're going to have very large spaces, or if you need very large spaces. So anything 1,000 square meters and up. Smaller real estate agents, really, if you're looking for smaller spaces, they're going to be the ones who have the network, and will be able to give you the advice and help you negotiate, and then also introduce you to potentially cheaper, more affordable decoration companies, especially if you go into traditional spaces. Last but not least, meet with corporate services firms and legal professionals to understand, based on your business model, based on what you want to do in the short term, what you want to do in the long term, how the location can affect your business. Okay. The more people you talk to and get an understanding of what is right for you, and you hear the war stories of what people have gone through in terms of changing office space, it's going to help you. So talk to as many professionals. And then obviously, if you use a law firm for the incorporation, try and get free rent for a year. Why not? Right? Just remember, you've got to talk with them about it, understand what is the term of that lease agreement, and make sure it's in your calendar that you know when you change it, because the law firms won't notify you on this. I can tell you that much. I've seen it. We've become the reminder for a lot of our clients. Okay, so just remember that aspect. All right, that's the end of today's presentation. If you've got any questions, please insert them. Stefan, I hope I answered your question regarding moving districts, but if you've got any other questions, now's the time to insert it into the chat box. As usual, I love to hear what people's takeaways were from today. It always gives me insight into how to update the presentations later on. If you are struggling to understand what is a registered office address, how it may affect your China business, if you need any more information on that, we can set up a one-to-one call. In the email that I'll be sending out associated with this presentation, you'll get a link to our diary, and you can just set up a call straight away. Otherwise, email me, Christina@woodburnglobal.com, and I'd be happy to help you. Don't forget to share our roundtable with more people. If you've got colleagues or friends who are interested in these topics, then do let them know. Next week's roundtable is about creating your e-commerce business model. So we're going really in depth about e-commerce in general, the types of structures you can set up, how you can start, how you can expand, and how you can scale up. So if you're interested in joining that, you are all already signed up for it. If you're in the community, you've already got the link. It's the same link every week. So you can just pop in at 1 o'clock Central European time. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. Those who joined me live, those of you who are going to be watching this on replay, I appreciate you all sticking in, and see you soon. Have a great day. Take care and goodbye.